Olá, eu me chamo Gleice Leitor, sou diretora de Educação e Pesquisa da Oficina Francisco Brenan e apresento a vocês a série Paulo Freire, Arte Contemporânea e Educação, um projeto no qual investigamos as ressonâncias do pensamento deste educador pernambucano na produção artística contemporânea. Neste episódio, intitulado Diálogo e Curadoria, nós reunimos o pesquisador e curador Moacir dos Anjos e o curador Finkelpearl para uma conversa sobre a radicalidade da ideia de diálogo no pensamento de Paulo Freire. Uma entrevista com Paulo Freire, realizada por Tom, foi o mote para reflexões sobre temas como a função social do artista e as relações entre pensamento e ação política na pedagogia deste autor. Nós desejamos a vocês uma ótima conversa.
Bom, Tom, e estamos aqui estabelecer essa conversa, né, em torno da obra do Paulo Freire, né, e de suas relações com o campo da arte, da curadoria, além, obviamente, do campo da educação. E essa conversa, né, a ideia de ter essa conversa surge de uma entrevista que você fez com Paulo Freire em 1996, já muitos anos atrás. Então, para começar nosso diálogo, eu queria que você me falasse um pouco das circunstâncias dessa entrevista, como é que ela surgiu e como foi essa aproximação sua com o Paulo Freire.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today. In 1996, I had just been spending 6 years as the director of something called the Percent for Art program in New York City. That's a program that commissions public art. And during that time, I was thinking more and more about, the questions of what is successful public art and how dialogue is such an important part of that. I had read Pedagogy of the Oppressed years before then, but I picked it back up and I was thinking about Paulo Freire. And I was then invited to Sao Paulo to participate in a conference about public art by Sesc Sao Paulo. And they brought in a bunch of people from different places, including New York City. And I wrote back to the organizers and said, I will definitely come. I'd love to come to Sao Paulo, but a condition is you have to set up for me an interview with Paulo Freire, because he was a great hero of mine. And so they said, yes, we can do that. They contacted him. He said he'd be happy to do the interview. And then I arrived in Sao Paulo and for the conference, and I actually went over to his house on the arranged date, had a driver. And I went and he said, I'm just not feeling well. I can't talk to you, do an interview today. But he said, please. And I said, I was very disappointed. He said, come back, in 2 or 3 days. So I was very disappointed. But he said, no, please don't leave. Let's sit down. Let's have some coffee. So we sat down and it was just incredibly relaxed. And he was asking about, I think, American sports and things like that, which was very surprising to me. Anyway, it was just a wonderful conversation. Then I went back to his house 2 or 3 days later, and I was able to conduct the interview. But the basic idea was his fundamental ideas of interactive sharing of power, of problem posing rather than problem solving education.
I don't want to say that I am prevented from knowing what I would like to say there before going. No, because look, I have, as a man, I am a project. No? If I am a project, it means that I have objectives, because if I did not have some objectives and some ends, because of which I fight, I could not be a project. And it takes part of my project to realize, at least, what kind of arguments I can use in order, for example, to work against racism, for example. It is, for me, it is legitimate. What is not legitimate is to try to impose on them precisely the arguments I thought of before. Do you see? Because even though, it is not possible, because a conversation cannot be pre-established. I don't know what you can say to me in answering my question, for example. I cannot know before. I have to become engaged in order to follow our process of conversation. No?
Those were so relevant to what I was thinking about for art at that time. And also this whole idea of awakening critical consciousness. He was a great hero of mine, but I felt like I was able to do the interview in a little bit because I had been able to relax and have coffee with him earlier in that week, and he put me at ease.
E é interessante essa entrevista porque ele fala de uma maneira muito mais solta, livre, né, de alguns temas que atravessam a sua obra, a obra do Paulo Freire. E é claro que a gente tem que lembrar que essas ideias do Paulo Freire estão muito relacionadas ao ambiente político em que elas surgiram. No final dos anos 50, começo dos anos 60, um momento de grande ebulição política no Brasil. Não só Paulo Freire, mas outros personagens, outros teóricos, outros pensadores, né, pensaram nessa relação emancipadora da educação, da arte. Né? E eu me lembro sempre de um texto do crítico e poeta brasileiro, Ferreira Goulart, né, que ele faz uma reflexão sobre a função social do artista, né, que é uma reflexão muito importante também naquele momento. Né? E o Goulart dizia que para ele não existiriam artistas descomprometidos ou descompromissados, né? E mesmo aqueles artistas que dizem que não estão interessados em política, na verdade eles estão implicados, né, na manutenção ou na transformação, né, do contexto em que eles vivem. Para Goulart, o que diferenciaria esses artistas que se dizem descomprometidos daqueles artistas que são assumidamente comprometidos, engajados com a realidade, com o mundo que eles vivem, é que esses últimos, os comprometidos, né, assumem a responsabilidade, né, com esse mundo deles, assumem sua responsabilidade. Né. E essa visão do Ferreira Goulart me parece muito próxima dessa ideia de Paulo Freire, sobre o papel social dos artistas e o papel social da arte. Né? Porque para Freire não há como fugir do fato que todos nós, artistas ou não artistas, curadores, educadores, enfim, todos nós somos seres sociais. Né?
Even though the artist is not interested, for example, in making a protest art. Mm-hmm. But the artist cannot escape from the social dimension of his or her existence. Mm-hmm. Then, in many aspects, when the artist creates, the artist is projecting in his work or her work the social influence, the political influence, the ideological influence with which the artist is. Mm-hmm. It is social and not only individual, no matter the artist is working alone, for example, mm-hmm. but he is a social being.
Ou seja, todos nós estamos comprometidos de um modo ou de outro, né, com a realidade. Né? Então, eu queria que você falasse um pouco um modo como você entende o papel político dos artistas e o papel político da arte nessa perspectiva de Paulo Freire. Né? Como você entende, né, o papel político da arte e dos artistas pensando na contribuição de Paulo Freire, nesse entendimento dele que somos todos seres sociais?
Yeah, I felt that in talking to him, that came out very clearly. But he also, that's throughout his work, this idea that we're all social beings. So you can be an artist who's just painting a landscape or painting a flower. And there was a beautiful moment during the interview where Paulo Freire said, look at this painting on my wall here. And it was just a very beautiful painting. I think it was a flower. And he said, you can think about this painting in terms of beauty, but you can also ask the question, who has access to beauty? So if you're living in a social, we are all living in a social environment. There's no escaping the social. But you could be very explicitly, making a political statement in your work, or there could be a political statement inherent in your work because some people in their lives are largely denied access to beauty. So that was something that I really thought about for years. I thought that, in fact, some of the most politically committed artists are sometimes rather naive about the actual effect of their political work. That they can make these political statements, but as long as they're sort of in the social context, let's say of a museum or a gallery, maybe that's not that effective. Whereas sometimes if a artist were to be working, let's say, within a community that doesn't have a lot of beauty and beautifies, let's say, a park or a building, they might have more effect on, let's say, working class people and have more of an effect, politically than the artist who assumes the mantle themselves of a political artist. And I think, certainly that's the kind of thing that Paulo Freire was both interested, it seemed in our conversation, in the artists who, intentionally took on this idea of being political, and also simultaneously interested in the idea that all artists are political, whether or not they're making that political statement.
In discussing beauty, you can easily discuss with the people ethical questions because of the relationships between ethics and aesthetics. But in discussing ethics and aesthetics, you discuss politics. For example, you can discuss the right of the beauty, the right the poor people have to be beautiful and to have beauties, to create beauties. Nevertheless, the poor people have been prevented from getting beauty. And what it does mean? Why? Then you can discuss politics, organization of society, of the state, and so on.
And I think it brings back, this idea also, I was thinking about, well, Paulo Freire says there's no such, you can't be neutral as a teacher. And you also can't be neutral as an artist. In a way, you're making a political statement, you're making political acts, even if it's not consciously or explicitly part of your practice.
Acho que aí você mencionou alguns aspectos centrais, né, dessa ideia de Paulo Freire sobre a dinâmica social, né? E é interessante essa coisa da beleza, né? Você falou da beleza, né? Porque é muito comum quando a gente discute essa arte que é assumidamente política, né? A gente sempre está falando, quase sempre a gente está falando de uma produção artística que denuncia, né, danos, denuncia situações de desigualdades no mundo, né? E quando a gente pensa em arte política, geralmente a gente fala de uma arte que apresenta imagens de sofrimento, né? Imagens de sofrimento associada à fome, à guerra, ao racismo, ao sexismo, enfim, a várias formas de violência, né? Mas são imagens de sofrimento, que parecem querer nos mobilizar pelo sofrimento, né? Para querer apresentar... E é claro que muitas vezes a criação dessas imagens, né, ou seja, desses equivalentes sensíveis da realidade, dessas imagens da violência, né, muitas vezes elas são importantes mesmo que sejam feitas, né? Existem várias reflexões sobre isso, né? Elas são justificadas politicamente, até esteticamente. Mas a sua repetição, sempre apresentar essas imagens de sofrimento, né, parece que dá a entender que na vida dessas pessoas que são representadas, sofrendo, né, das pessoas pobres, das pessoas negras, dos indígenas, dos latinos, enfim, dependendo da situação que você vive, né, parece que na vida dessas pessoas não haveria lugar para a beleza, né? Não haveria lugar para aspirar à felicidade, né? Essa beleza, essa felicidade teriam que esperar até um outro momento no futuro, quando todas as causas dessas desigualdades, né, tivessem sido superadas. E E Freire, como você disse, parece que tem uma visão diferente, tem uma visão ele fala de um direito à beleza, né, na vida de qualquer pessoa, né, que qualquer pessoa tem o direito à beleza, né, mesmo aquela vivendo em situação de pobreza, em situação precária, né. E mais do que isso, e eu queria explorar um pouco mais isso com você, me parece que ele diz que a beleza pode ser emancipadora também. A beleza pode emancipar, né, situações de beleza, criação de imagens de beleza, de situações de beleza, de gestos, de textos, né, podem ser emancipadores, porque são afirmação de humanidade, né, são afirmação de humanidade que é subtraída, que é negada, né, pelas pessoas que dominam, que têm o poder de dominar e subalternizar, subordinar os outros, né. Então, na sua experiência, você tem uma larga experiência como curador, como gestor cultural, né? Qual é o lugar que você consegue enxergar, identificar o lugar da beleza em alguns projetos com que você já trabalhou, né? Ou em outra medida, você trabalha muito com projetos políticos, né? E eu te pergunto em que momento, em que medida a beleza é também política? E como você já encontrou isso em alguma situação, em algum projeto que você participou?
Yeah, let me give you an example of an artist, Cuban artist named Tania Bruguera.
Yeah.
She lives in the United States now, but she's Cuban and has lived there most of her life. So Tania Bruguera came to the United States and did a project. It was called Immigrant Movement. What it was, it's an art project. And this is the kind of thing that I don't think Paulo Freire understood exactly the kinds of artists who literally put into practice the idea that dialogue could be art. When Paulo Freire talked about art, he was pretty much talking about, let's say, paintings or sculpture or art shows. But this is a performance artist who has developed a practice over many years. And her art project lasted 7 years. In the 7 years, she created a community center. And the community center was sponsored by the museum, Queen's Museum, where I was the director at the time. And we funded it, and we paid for insurance and rent and, electricity and all that stuff. But what happened in the environment was it was open all the time, and it was a place for dialogue for the community. It is a place where, and this is a very low-income community, entirely Spanish-speaking community, immigrant heavy, a lot of people there without documentation, illegal, as it's called. So she created a space, and in that space, there was one workshop after another. And the workshops were everything from El Sistema was, the classical music practice, where people learn how to play practice. There was safety. A lot of the men worked in construction trades, so there were safety programs. There were theater programs, which were feminist theater programs, all of this taking place in Spanish. About 35,000 people a year were using that space, not 35,000 different people, but 35,000 visitors. So 500 visitors a week, let's say, something like that. So it was a space of dialogue. And I was talking to friends who came through that program, some of whom started as undocumented, became documented. The two things they said. One was, this was the space of freedom. Anything was possible. And actually, nothing costs any money. So if you walk in that door, nothing ever costs you to enter a dance program or a theater program or a safety program. And the other thing that they were saying, that my friends were saying who went through this, was that the result was not an object, but it was a way of acting. And I was thinking, and this is, if you read about Tania Bruguera and articles, you'll see there's a lot of references to Paulo Freire or, Art of the Oppressed or whatever. They're drawing titles. They think that she's very influenced by him. But that idea that the result of the project was a way of acting really was similar to, if I think of, Paulo Freire wasn't just interested in teaching illiterate adults how to read. He was interested in transforming a way of acting, a way of being in the world, the conscientization, critical consciousness. That was, I think, a project very, very much in the spirit of Paulo Freire.
Planting a tree can be also a creative and then an artistic job. No? Yes. Undoubtedly, the very movement of the body in order to make the, it's also, there is rhythm, no? There is harmony, there is contradiction in this. That is the very process of planting is very interesting. In some aspect, it is a violent process also. No? Because by making the wall, we are interfering in the nature of the being of the earth. You see? Sure. Then it is a more or less a violent process. Nevertheless, we can discuss the beauty of the objectives. That is, it is also an artistic job.
And I tried to talk to him a little bit about projects like that, but it was a little bit foreign to his consciousness at the time. I really would have loved to see him come, if he was still alive, and visit Corona, Queens, to the Spanish-speaking community, and see how his ideas were really changing people's lives through dialogue, through sharing of power, through asking community what they wanted, and through consciousness raising.
Eu acho que o exemplo da Tânia Brugueira é muito feliz, né? Porque, de fato, ela é uma das artistas que talvez melhor desenvolvem um trabalho artístico como prática social. Não é o objeto, não é nenhum resultado palpável, né? Mas a própria prática que ela estabelece é o principal do seu trabalho, né? Assim como para Paulo Freire, né, a própria prática, né, do ensino, né, do aprendizado, é um momento crucial, porque é o momento que você ganha consciência, né, do seu lugar no mundo, né? E para ele essas coisas estão muito relacionadas, né? A prática e o resultado, né? A reflexão e a prática, né? E esse aspecto dialógico também que você menciona aí, que é muito importante, né, no trabalho do Paulo Freire, né, e no trabalho desses artistas, como eu entendo, que é uma prática que, claro, você faz uma proposta, né, tem suas ideias, mas, ao mesmo tempo, você está aberto para ser surpreendido pelo outro, pela ideia do outro, pela fala do outro. E, portanto, refazer sempre, né, esse processo de criação, né, é uma criação compartilhada. Né. E uma curiosidade, Tom, se você falou da Tânia Brugueira, né, que é uma artista que tem uma tradição, né, nessa arte política já desde os anos 90, ou até antes um pouco, final dos anos 80, né. Mas uma curiosidade, se nos Estados Unidos hoje, entre jovens artistas que trabalham com questões políticas, se há alguma reverberação das ideias de Paulo Freire, se elas são presentes nas práticas de outros artistas jovens e também na prática curatorial. Como você acha que existe uma influência ou uma reflexão de jovens curadores a respeito das ideias do Paulo Freire?
So I think what's happening in American museums and the art world in general right now is that there's a bit of a shift in power from curators to departments of education. Departments of education are taking more power. They're being seen as more important than they used to be. And I think that there's a very deep relationship between the work of Paulo Freire and the kind of work that's been going on in education departments at museums. Not all museums. Some museums are, you go and there's the banking style of they're just telling you what's going on. But a lot of education departments throughout the United States are run on the basis of the idea of dialogue, are very influenced by Paulo Freire. And there's a whole new generation of museum directors who were education directors, not curators. So it's a shift in balance of power. And many of those museum directors, when they get to this, are trying to also run the institution in a more equitable dialogue-based way. So it's hard. because these are very big institutions with a lot of entrenched hierarchical structure. But there's a big revolution in American museums right now around labor, around transparency, around how the museum is run as a place to work, all of which I think Paulo Freire would have been excited to see. But it's also a transfer of power from curators, who still have a lot of power, by the way, I don't want to deny that, to the departments of education, which have been for a long time much more interested in connecting with communities, connecting with people outside of the elites. So that's what I think. That's where I think the biggest influence right now is through the change, shifting of power from curatorial to education, and then the directors, the new set of directors who are coming from education departments.
Esse movimento me parece muito importante, né? E não sei, eu acho que no Brasil a gente não tem ainda um movimento dessa natureza, pelo menos nessa magnitude, embora os projetos educativos, os setores educativos, os museus e instituições também tenham gradualmente recebido maior atenção e mais poder, né, para desenvolver trabalhos. Mas o meio da arte me parece que é muito hierarquizado também, né? Um meio se estrutura de uma maneira muito hierarquizada e, portanto, contrária a essa relação mais horizontal e dialógica, né, que Paulo Freire propunha. Então, eu acho que realmente é um grande desafio, né, estabelecer uma relação dialógica num meio tão hierarquizado, né, verticalizado, atravessado por disputas de poder, como o campo da arte. Mas é por isso que talvez é tão interessante, né, pensar Paulo Freire, né, pensar o mundo da arte a partir das ideias de Paulo Freire, porque é pensar justamente nesses ambientes de conflito, né, e pensar de formas novas o que a gente pensava já conhecer, né, a gente se surpreender, né, e estar aberto a essas situações de conflito. E a própria leitura da tua entrevista com o Paulo Freire me jogou numa situação que me fez repensar algumas coisas, né? Por exemplo, quando ele tem uma passagem em que ele fala de uma lembrança que ele tem, acho que é quando ele está falando sobre beleza, ele fala de uma lembrança que ele tem do Recife, na década de 30 do século passado, quando ele era muito jovem, ainda aqui e vivia no Recife. Ele diz que via nas ruas do Recife carregadores de piano andando pelas ruas, né, levando os pianos da loja para a casa de alguém, e eram aqueles homens. Eu sempre que vi essas imagens, claro que eu não vi ela pessoalmente, né, mas eu sempre vi essas imagens em fotografias reproduzidas em cartões postais, né, são imagens comuns que circulam, né, na iconografia da cidade. E eu sempre associei essa cena desses homens, desses trabalhadores carregando os pianos, né, sempre associei essas cenas unicamente a uma situação de exploração do outro, né? Ou seja, há uma distribuição desigual de possibilidades de trabalho, né, em função da raça das pessoas, da cor da pele, em função da classe social, porque você olha essas fotografias, todos esses carregadores de cinema, de piano, são homens pobres e negros, né? Então, para mim, era uma situação absolutamente, unicamente de exploração. Mas Paulo Freire, ele menciona algo nessa entrevista que me desconcertou um pouco, que me fez pensar novamente nessas imagens de outra maneira, né? Não só como uma expressão de exploração, mas de uma outra forma também.
It is beautiful. When I was a child in Recife, there was a kind of profession. The man whose fundamental job was to move pianos from a house to another one. Let us suppose you live here and you change the address, And then there were different teams of specialists to move the piano, very heavy. And I remember, I never forget how they did the job. It was a ballet. It was a ballet. The fact is that, and I am sure that from the point of view of the physics, the mathematics, we could make calculations to explain, for example, how to divide the weight of the object or through the different movements of the body in order to put on the heads of each one, and also how to continue to divide the weight by the rhythm of the walking and the singing.
They sang?
Yeah.
And they walked?
Fantastic. It is, I am very sorry because today since 40 years ago, 30 years ago, we lost.
O Freire diz que se lembra dessas imagens, ele lembra que ao mesmo tempo que esses homens carregavam esses pianos, né, eles cantavam em uníssono, cantavam juntos e faziam quase como uma coreografia com seus corpos, né? Ou seja, eles afirmavam sua presença singular no mundo, mesmo naquela situação de exploração, né? E eu acho isso muito interessante e muito bonito, que é essa capacidade de ver a ambiguidade das coisas, né? Como numa situação de exploração, existe também a possibilidade de introduzir resistência, de introduzir a insurgência, o levante, né? Então, eu queria que você, a partir dessa história, né, que é tão bonita, eu acho que Paulo Freire conta, né, que você falasse um pouco do que você acha justamente dessa capacidade de resistência, né, do subordinado a partir da arte, a partir do movimento do corpo, a partir da voz, a partir do texto, a partir do objeto, da pintura, enfim. No fundo, o que eu estou querendo perguntar é o seguinte, né, qual é, na sua opinião, a capacidade transformadora da arte, né? Como a arte se mistura, mesmo nesses movimentos políticos mais de rua, mais, digamos, duros, questões estão... Sempre há um movimento de corpo que aparece, há uma voz que aparece, uma imagem que é criada, né? E vimos isso muito naqueles movimentos de rua no começo dos anos 2000, no mundo inteiro, né? Eu queria que você falasse um pouco sobre como você vê esse papel transformador da arte em meio à miséria, em meio à violência.
You know, it's so interesting, Moacir, because I remember him saying that, and I didn't have a visual image of this in my mind at all. So I did not. All I remember was, him saying the piano movers and the way that they would sing. And, they're singing to keep the rhythm so that they carry the piano. They have to be in synchronization. So there was a functional aspect to it. But it's also, part of it makes me think of that whole question of access to beauty. And, these are people who are saying, even in this oppressive situation, we're going to create our own beauty out of which is also functional. It's a functional, and I would love to hear what the songs sounded like. And that's what he was remembering. But it reminds me, in a way, of two things. One is when I was in Sao Paulo, and I'm not an expert in Brazil. I went to samba school, and I saw people practicing. It's incredible energy and the rhythm. And this was, many months away from any sort of public manifestation. So I feel like, and this is true in New York City, where I know very much what's going on culturally, there's art and culture in every single community, even the poorest community. People are doing, performing arts actually, I think, is more common in very low income communities because you don't need to build a sculpture or have a place to make a painting. But there are dance schools throughout New York City in every neighborhood. And sometimes it relates to identity. In New York City, there are many, many dance schools where immigrant communities are holding on to their traditions. They say, we're going to teach our kids to dance in the way that we danced where we were coming from, whether it was Latin America or Asia, Africa. There's intense dance traditions here in immigrant communities. So I think the other thing, though, is to say, you can think about the limitations of the creativity and the art. That if this is as oppressive a job as it sounds like it probably was a very physically demanding job. It probably didn't pay much money. They probably, certainly it wasn't something with health insurance and pension and all that kind of stuff, which is a good job. So on the one hand, the music is great. It might have been a nice thing in spectacle in the city. It might have made the adventure of moving a piano better and safer. But it doesn't stop the underlying oppression that you're talking about. These people needed better jobs, or if those pianos needed to be moved, they needed a unionized workforce that gave breaks, that took care of their back problems that they were certainly experiencing. So there is that limitation, and maybe you have to think about that limitation simultaneously to thinking of the joyous moment of hearing the music, or the fact that people are, like you say, resisting the oppression of their job by saying, I have a voice, and I'm going to sing with my voice, even as I'm being oppressed. So I feel, in a way, I think we both feel rather ambivalent about that story. It is a story of oppression also. We have to remember that, simultaneous to the art.
Eu acho que são situações que nos colocam justamente diante dessas... do fato de que, tanto no nosso cotidiano de trabalho, como no ambiente de criação artística, nada é tão certo, né? Nada é tão estável, né? Estamos o tempo todo lidando com os paradoxos, com as ambivalências, com as contradições, e é nessas frestas que a arte parece ser mais efetiva, né? De desenhar talvez outras possibilidades de futuro, né? De pensar outros desenhos de mundo, né? Que naquelas canções, naquelas coreografias dos carregadores de piano estavam implícitas, né? Outras formas de viver no mundo, né? Estava implícita a beleza que é negada a eles, né? Está implícita a felicidade que é negada a eles, a segurança que é negada a eles, né? Acho que a arte tem essa capacidade de inserir nessas frestas, né? Quase uma utopia, né? De um outro mundo, né? E eu acho que no Brasil a gente tem na produção brasileira contemporânea, eu acho que a gente está vivendo até um momento de grande riqueza dessa produção artística política, ou politizada, explicitamente politizada, porque ao mesmo tempo você tem uma série de artistas, né, que criam essas situações, essas imagens de sofrimento, que denunciam essas situações. Você tem também, simultaneamente, cada vez mais forte, uma produção que afirma, né, essas possibilidades futuras de uma vida mais bonita, mais justa, né, mais feliz para essas populações que sofrem essas violências, né? Então, acho que, né, a afirmação de uma utopia mesmo, e utopia é sempre uma coisa diferente para cada pessoa, né? Quando a gente pensa numa utopia, pensamos a partir daquilo que nós não temos, daquilo que nos faz falta, né? E as pessoas que não têm emprego, não têm alimentação, não têm casa, elas pensam numa utopia em que essas coisas existam, né? Ou seja, a felicidade, a beleza passa por essas coisas também. E eu acho que nos Estados Unidos, né, embora também não conheça a fundo, né, mas já li várias coisas sobre essa relação entre arte e política, né, e vários debates que existem nos Estados Unidos sobre essa relação, né. Eu me recordo que existem vários autores que defendem uma arte comunitária, né, participativa, né, explicitamente política, mas que não está ligada necessariamente ao circuito da arte. Uma produção artística que está envolvida com a comunidade e que muitas vezes é até desprezada pelas bienais, pelos grandes museus, pelos grandes curadores, pelas galerias. Você deve saber muito bem isso. E, por outro lado, existem aqueles que acusam esses processos artísticos colaborativos de simplesmente explorarem as comunidades envolvidas e não devolverem nada a elas, né? Ou seja, eu queria saber, são várias questões nesse debate, eu queria que você comentasse um pouco essa relação entre artista e comunidade, e museus, enfim, pensando também em Paulo Freire, né? Naquela relação que ele fala entre o educador e o educando, né? Como essa relação entre o artista e a comunidade, entre o museu e o artista, enfim, a partir desse, eu sei que é um debate muito amplo e muito complexo nos Estados Unidos sobre essas questões, mas eu acho importante ouvir você um pouco a esse respeito.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the things, by the way, let me just go back one point and then I'll answer that question. I was just thinking about when we were talking about the piano movers, that after all, they're moving the piano so somebody can make some art. And I think in a way, it's a kind of metaphor for the fact that the underpinning of a lot of art and is that elites get to play the piano, but the poor people have to move the piano. So it's an interesting mix of making art while moving the piano to make the art. Anyway, I just want to mention that. But so I was just thinking as you're speaking about another artist that I've been involved with, and his name is Rick Lowe, L-O-W-E, Rick Lowe. And he started a project that was very influenced by, I'm not sure explicitly by Paulo Freire, but by sort of radical pedagogy and social art. And that project is called Project Row Houses. And he started by buying a couple of buildings. He's a Black artist who's working in a Black community. He's from Mississippi, from a very poor family. But he became an artist, and he was in a show at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston one day. A young man came up to him and said, artists are very good at pointing to problems. And Moacir, as you said, a lot of artists point to problems, and they show people who are in terrible circumstances, et cetera. And the young man said, how about if artists could be involved in solutions, if you're creative? So anyway, Rick, it's a long story, but with a group of other African-American folks, he built an organization that got bigger and bigger. He worked there for 22 years as an art project. By the time they were finished, they had 54 buildings. They had housing for single mothers. They had all of this incredible community work with education where people could be part of the educational opportunity from the time they're 6 until they are 18. Amazing. Now, I love the Whitney Museum, and the Whitney has one of our maybe most important biennials. But Rick Lowe, the same guy who created all this work, and never was in the Whitney Biennial. But he's also just in recent years taken up painting. He's quite a talented painter, I will say. Very good. This biennial, Whitney Biennial that's right now, he's finally made it to the Whitney Biennial because he's making paintings. So what does that say about the fact that our art world and our biennials and our museums can't recognize what most people, and by the way, we have the MacArthur Genius Award, which is sort of the highest award you could win as an artist. He won that award for his community-based work, but it didn't get him into biennials. And so that I feel that museums still have a long way to go, even if I've said, the education or departments might be taking more power. Museums are still based on the idea of, creating objects that are actually part of a market that is, dominated by the rich. So we have to, understand the actual politics of the works and the flow of power that is so hidden sometimes. Again, like just playing that piano, once it arrives, not thinking of who delivered the piano. I don't know if this is answering your question, but I do feel that there is a change happening in museums. It's changing partially because our staff members at museums are becoming much more diverse. More women are becoming directors of museums. There's way, way more Black curators, African-American curators are taking many positions of power. And I think that there is a lot of new blood and new winds of change in the museum, but there's still a long way to go. The basic underlying situation is that museums have elite audiences and serve elite boards and get money from very rich people to operate in the United States.
Então, só para você falasse um pouco mais, eu acho muito interessante o que você falou, e essa dimensão, essa metáfora aí dos carregadores de piano, né? Voltando a ela, né? Como aqueles que carregam instrumentos de beleza dos outros, né? Mas, ao mesmo tempo, fazem beleza com isso. Né? Eles conseguem, né, friccionar essa atividade, essa exploração. Essa ambivalência me faz lembrar outra questão, outra ambivalência fundamental na obra do Paulo Freire, que é justamente essa entre ação e reflexão. Né? Essa dialética, né, entre ação e reflexão que o Paulo Freire insistia. Né?
Yeah, I think that this question of the relationships between action and reflection, thinking and doing, practice and theory, I think that it is today and it will be until lots of time a very important question for us. We became beings, historical beings, we became social beings, we became beings programmed for learning and then for teaching. And we became, because of that, we became beings of memory. No? We became beings of interfering, or for interfering. No? That is, we are called to change the world and not to establish it, and not to stop it, to immobilize it. Then, because of that, it is impossible for us to separate as if it were two things, different things, thinking and acting. The unity, contradictory unity of it, is so strong that by telling you I am a theorist, I am telling you I am a practicist. You see, and vice versa. What I want to avoid is to say that we have different times, one for acting, the other one for thinking. It does not exist. What nevertheless exists is that we have preponderant action time, preponderant reflection time, but we always are inserted in or into action and reflection. But in some moments, we need to make the difficult exercise of getting distance from the action, in order particularly to understand better what we are doing. This is then a specific time for thinking of the action. But when we were acting, we were thinking. And when we were thinking, we were in some way acting. But it is undoubtedly believed there is a moment in which we have to stop what we are doing. But look, we stop what we are doing, but we continue to do through getting distance from the moment in which we are doing in order to understand much better the doing we are doing. No? Because of that, it is impossible, for example, the existence of any action without the evaluation. That is, the evaluation of the action implies moments of reflection upon action, or on action. The evaluation process is a very theoretical process. That is, when we get distance for evaluating, we are theorizing the action, or we are identifying from the theoretical point of view what we were doing. But it's impossible to separate, to consider two different things. Maybe we have two different moments inside of just one, of making theory and making action, making practice.
Eu acho que os trabalhadores, os carregadores de piano, naquele momento, né, estão, na prática, construindo uma forma de pensamento também. Eles estão nos ensinando, né, como atuar politicamente, né, como resistir politicamente em meio à exploração. Né. E isso está no coração das ideias de Paulo Freire sobre educação e sobre emancipação. Né. Não existia uma separação entre você, né, aprender e se conscientizar politicamente. Né. E a conscientização política não está dissociada da emancipação. Ou seja, a própria conscientização política, né, é emancipação também. Né. Não são coisas separadas. Você não se prepara, se emancipa para depois buscar a sua emancipação. São coisas, assim como os trabalhadores, os carregadores de piano, naquele momento que eles estão cantando, e eles estão também, né, criando uma coletividade, né? Estão afirmando uma coletividade, estão criando laços, né? Estão, de algum modo, atuando politicamente. E eu acho que essa é uma lição muito importante para os dias de hoje, né? Tanto nos Estados Unidos como no Brasil, né? Em períodos históricos de tanta regressão política, né? De tanta violência política, de tanta ameaça à arte, né? E eu queria, para concluir, Tom, queria que você falasse um pouco sobre como Freire pode ser uma inspiração, não só para os artistas, mas também para pessoas como você, como eu, como tantos outros, que trabalham à frente de instituições, que são curadores, que trabalham com projetos educativos, né? Como Freire nos ajuda a resistir, né? E eu me lembro... Quando falo em resistência, eu me lembro muito do Walter Benjamin. E Walter Benjamin dizia, no final dos anos 30, ali já quase à beira da eclosão da Segunda Guerra, e quando ele já estava fugindo das forças fascistas, né, ele dizia que fazer revolução é impedir a barbárie, é bloquear a barbárie. A grande revolução é impedir que sejamos destruídos. Isso já é uma grande revolução. E eu acho que no momento, assim, talvez, não só por questões climáticas, né, a ameaça climática que nos atinge, né, mas talvez a grande revolução seja impedir essa barbárie, né, seja impedir essa catástrofe que nos ameaça todo dia. Né. E eu queria te perguntar justamente como Paulo Freire nos ajuda a fazer essa revolução, como nos ajuda a pensar nossa atuação no dia a dia nas instituições de arte, nas curadorias, para que nós resistamos a essa catástrofe que nos ameaça o tempo todo.
Yeah, that's a very profound question. So actually, I have with me, this is Pedagogy of the Oppressed, of course. A lot of people have read. I think Walter Benjamin needed to read Pedagogy of Hope. He ran out of hope at the end. But here's another book, which is Pedagogy of the City. And I want to say that this was extremely inspiring to me. I was, Paulo Freire took over as the head of education for Sao Paulo, a school system, which was had lots of issues and problems. But it was just inspiring to me that he did that. It's like, as this incredible, brilliant philosopher and educational theorist, took a job running a department of a city. So actually, that's what I did, partially inspired by Paulo Freire. My last job, I've worked several jobs since then, but I worked as the commissioner of cultural affairs for New York City. So I was running a city agency with all the same kind of problems. Paulo Freire said in that book, one of the biggest problems, you think about educational theory, there's also just roofs of buildings that need to be fixed and they shouldn't be leaking, right? So when he took over the school system, maybe the biggest problem in Sao Paulo was leaking roofs, not, banking, education system, or both were important. So anyway, I feel like I feel entering public life, being not afraid to enter public life is something that, as hard as it is, and I had a hard time as commissioner, I lasted 6 years, it was very tumultuous at certain points. I gained inspiration from Paulo Freire to do that as well. So something like Tania Bergero's project at the Queen's Museum, and her whole, that's very easy to understand. And I think people could say, oh, completely influenced by Paulo Freire, look at the structure of the whole thing, but also public service. And what Paulo Freire said at the end of the interview was, there's no clear differentiation between theory and practice. You're sort of in theory and practice, and they're back both together, and theory is practice and practice is theory. And you're sort of more predominantly on the practice side or predominantly on the theory side, but both are present all the time. And I felt that was true when I was running the cultural affairs department in New York City. It's true today, even on this interview, that we're talking about theory, but maybe somebody will be inspired to take action or to read Paulo Freire and then do something that's based on dialogue or rethink the way that they act as a curator. But he was just, to me, it was equally inspiring to talk to him and just experience his brilliance as to just meet him as a person. I had a wonderful experience, and I think that was, it's nice to meet somebody that you admire that much and have them turn out to be, in person, at least during the time that I was there, such a great, wonderful, inspiring person in his self, let's say.
Bom, então muito obrigado pelas suas considerações, suas respostas, seu depoimento, né, em relação à sua convivência com Paulo Freire, o que ele te ensinou, não sei se é a palavra correta, te ensinou, mas enfim, o que ele te proporcionou, né, em termos de criação de atitudes diante do seu trabalho, como educador, né, e gestor e curador de arte. Eu acho que, concordo com você, nós temos muito a aprender com Paulo Freire ainda hoje, né? Muito a aprender essa capacidade de nos espantarmos, no bom sentido, né? Nos deixarmos desafiar pelo outro, né? Ouvir o outro, né? E nos transformarmos através desse contato com o outro, né? E nesse processo aprendermos formas novas de convivência, né? De construção de vidas, né? Então, muito obrigado e espero que essa conversa, de algum modo, frutifique e tenha seguimento.
Thank you. It's just been a great pleasure to be here, and I love speaking about Paulo Freire, and I cannot wait for my next visit to Brazil.